We are working on the laptop store project from the YByte Python curriculum available at www.ybyte.in. We saw how previously we took all the users' inputs and converted that into a dictionary called user choice. Now the keys on this dictionary are exactly the same keys that we have on the dictionaries that represent the laptops. For example, brand, model, price, and that is not a surprise because basically we have asked the user a simple preference. If the user has a preference for a brand or a model and a price and so on, and hence we have a corresponding, let's say, choice available. What we are going to do next is that, look, we are going to convert this user choice into what we call a query. This query is going to be a string. We are going to run this query through every laptop in our inventory, basically the laptops list. And from this, we'll filter out, we'll select, let's say, the few laptops that do meet the criteria. Now, the query could be something like, look, the brand has to be WDell. Basically, we will pick up all the laptops that are, let's say, of the brand WDell, or it could be a little bit more complicated query, as we'll see later. But the point is that, we do not know how many laptops will get selected. It could be all the laptops if the user has absolutely no preference, or it could be a subset. It could even be zero laptops, right? So basically, this selected is also let's say, a list of dictionaries. Because this will keep track of those laptops that have been selected. These dictionaries here will be those that have been, let's say, selected from here. So that's the sort of big picture view. Now, the next question that comes up is, well, what must the query look like? Remember, in our case, we are keeping it simple. The player specifies a single value for every parameter. For example, player may want, let's say, 2 GB RAM, 9-inch screen size, and so on. What we need to do, like we discussed, is to look through every laptop in the inventory and ask a question. Well, look, for this laptop, is, for example, the brand equal to WDell? Now, notice we are looking for a strict equality over here, which means that the query that we are going to run is something of the form, let's say, laptop brand double equal to WDell. In this case, basically, user has given a preference WDell for the brand. User could have specified multiple criteria. For example, let's say brand should be WDell and the screen size should be 9-inch. In which case, we are going to run a more complicated query, basically this and this. However, notice that there is a very clear structure over here. Every query that we are looking at is strictly an equal to. It's basically the name of this dictionary, which we are calling laptop. We'll see how this comes about. The key that we are looking at, that's same as the user, let's say, a choice, as well as the laptop, equal to this string which has come from the user preference. Now clearly we're checking for equality, hence double equal to, but notice that every query has this structure including these apostrophes, and that's important, otherwise the code won't run, because we want this, whatever is in the square bracket to be understood as a key, not like a variable. This in mind, we are going to start creating the query. We are going to write the code to create the query. It's not very hard, I would say, but definitely has to be done a little bit carefully. Let's first see the logic, what we are going to build, and then let's code this up so that we get a better feel for it. Basically, we'll start with an empty string. We will go through all the keys in the user choice. So that's why I run a for loop on the user choice. And I just ask myself, look, if user choice KK, basically if user is none, which means the user has not indicated any preference for that particular, let's say, field. I will just say, okay, pass, don't do anything. However, if the user has indeed displayed some kind of, let's say, preference, we just go and create this query. Now, this looks quite complicated because of all the apostrophes and so on, but in fact, it's quite logical. We will see this in the code. That's kind of more clear, but this is where we are going to go. So I come back to my code over here. I just say, well, let me create the query based on the user, let's say, requirements. And again, like I said, query, we will start with an empty string. So I just call it query is, for example, let's say an empty string. We will run a for loop on the user choice. So I just go and say for KK in, let's say, user choice. Now this for loop is running on a dictionary, which means I'm going to go through all the keys of this user choice, which are basically the same as the keys on the laptop. And I ask myself a question, well, look, if user choice, let's say KK, dot say lower, lower is a method, that's why I need those parentheses. is equal to, let's say, none. So user has not specified any choice. Well, no problem. So I must have a double equal to here. That's why it's giving a bit strange. So I must have a double equal to, because checking for equality. If that happens, well, I just pass because user has no preference for this. Else, I assume the user has chosen something. I go and, let's say, start forming a query. Now, in order to sort of clarify my point here, let me put two example queries that will guide us in creating the next statement. Let's say the user specifies a single query for the brand. It's going to look something like laptop, square brackets, let's say brand, which will come, of course, from the KK. Closing the square bracket, double equal to, let's say something like W del. Now again, this string W del will come from the user preference. That's the user choice KK. In fact, query will look something like this, including these apostrophes. If I have a more complicated query, so it could be something like, let's say, say this, and let's say, I just do this again, maybe laptop RAM is equal to, let's say, 2 GB. The reason I'm writing this is because, it makes it easier for us to create the query, the next statement, because with this, we'll know exactly what we're putting in all those apostrophes and so on. We just want to append the query every time I come here. So I just go and say, well, query is equal to query, say plus. Notice I need to get, notice first of all that these are strings. So basically plus is going to be like join apple banana concatenation. My first substring is here laptop, square bracket. Next, I need this apostrophe, before, let's say, the brand. The way we get that is by just saying, okay, look, I need a string and I need to add one more, I need to add an escape character, because this will create that extra, let's say, quotation. Plus, I need to put the brand, which is nothing but the KK itself, because remember, KK is a key. KK is running over the dictionary, so that's a key. I just put KK. This plus I need to end the ending quotation, so that is basically once again this, which gives me the ending quotations. Thereafter I just have, let's say, this part of the string, so I can do that by just saying, well, look, plus say square bracket space equal to. Now I need once again let's say the there's this apostrophe here. Let me get one more of this. So I'll just in fact take this entire thing, since I've already done this, and I will place this, let's say, over here. Now do this slowly because it's quite easy to sort of make mistakes in this, but basically I'm getting apostrophe. Now here I would put something like, say, WDEL or RAM or whatever. That is essentially user choice KK, because that's a key on the dictionary user choice, right? Now remember, for a more complex query, I will also have to have an AND. So what I will do is that I'll just keep adding AND for every item that comes here, and then later on I'll remove one of the ANDs, and we'll see that in action. For now, however, I'll just go and put, let's say, and give a space, and I think this should be okay. Again, go through it slowly. Try to look at this, for example, to get something like this, right? And best way again is to make it work. Try to see it running. So I come in here, let's say I say, well, no, I don't have any preference for brand. I don't have any preference for model. I don't have preference for, let's say, CPU, but I do have preference for, let's say, speed. And, maybe I just say 3 gigahertz. Let's say I do have preference, so maybe I'll just say none. Let's get a simple query first. Say none, say none, say none again. If I look at the query, so query, notice it looks quite okay to me, because basically that's laptop, square bracket, speed, because that's what I look for, including these apostrophes. So those have come because of those escape characters over there. That should be equal to 3 gigahertz. I can give a space over here for better readability, and that should be nice. Of course, there's an AND over here, which we'll fix a little bit later, but I'll just give a single space at the end of equal to, and that should be good. Let's take one more example. So I'll take one more example this time. Let's try to give a more complicated query. Let's say my brand has to be, say, WACER. No preference for model, let's say none. Preference for CPU, say none. But I do have preference for, say, speed, say 3 gigahertz. I want preference for, let's say, RAM 4 GB. And let's say none, and say none, and say none. Now, when I look at the query now, obviously it's going to be a little bit more complicated. Notice its laptop brand is equal to WACER, and laptop speed is equal to 3 gigahertz. Laptop RAM is equal to, let's say, 4 gigahertz. All these are double equal tos because that's what I want them to be. This is looking good. However, you notice that there is this extra and in the end. I can fix that by using string slicing. Remember, slicing allows me to get, let's say, substring from a bigger string. In this case, I want my query to look exactly like what it's looking, barring these last 4 characters. So I'm just going to say, look, get this entire query, slice it in a way. So let's just see this. So if I say query, let's say start at 0, stop at, let's say, -4, which means 4th character from the end, -4, go in steps of 1. If I were to look at this, this looks pretty cool because this is the entire query. And this is how I would want it to be. So I'm just going to say, well, look at so be very careful with the indentations over here. Let the entire for loop run because that's when the query gets completed. At the end, add the same indentation as the for loop. Let's say, I just say remove the last and I can do that by saying query is equal to query, again, start, stop, and step. And that will do the job for me. We will move further basis this query. But before I go there, I hope you have been finding this interesting. Go through this slowly. It's not very hard actually, right? But obviously a little bit laborious. Now, before I wrap this up, I just want to make a couple of observations. First thing first, do a bit of compare and contrast to some of our earlier projects. Look at how similar the query formation is to the missing operators project where we formed, for example, this question. That was much like query formation, right? So we had all these extra characters which we were putting in. Little bit painful now because of those extra apostrophes, but the idea is actually similar, and that's exactly kind of what we are doing. Number 2, think through your calculator project. In fact, the situation is quite similar. In the calculator project, the user would give choices from, let's say, these buttons, and those choices will get displayed over here in the expression box, kind of like our query. Once the equal to button is clicked, the result is computed and the result is displayed here. In fact, that's kind of what we are doing. We have taken the user's preference, we have created a query. Next, we will see how we filter those laptops lists and create our result, which is the list of, say, selected laptops. On this note, just see how connected this thing is to the real world. In fact, such operations are going on in a lot of places. Think when you're shopping products, you're booking tickets, booking hotels, booking vacations, and so on. Every time we put in our criteria, maybe say, for example, even booking flights, we tell where do we want to go, how many people are there, blah, blah, blah. A large database is looked up. First a query is formed. That query is used to look into a database. That database puts out results which are then displayed to us in a web page. So while our query is simple, while our interface is quite simple, the connections to the real world are unmistakable. And I do hope you're enjoying this entire process. If you think this way of learning is a cool way of learning, look at our website www.ybyte.in because that is how we learn Python programming. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.